Michael Boyle's StrengthCoach.com presents the Strength Coach Podcast, brought to you by Perform Better, the experts in functional training and rehabilitation. PerformBetter.com.
Hey everybody, welcome to episode 274 of the Strength Coach Podcast, the official podcast of Michael Boyle's StrengthCoach.com, the world's best source for strength and conditioning information. Brought to you by Perform Better, the experts in functional training and rehabilitation. I'm your host, Anthony Renna, and the show notes are located at ContinueFit.com. It's also where you find out about my book, Be Like the Best, and the Be Like the Best workbook. The book consists of 50 interviews with top fitness pros, and after each interview is what I call a Be Like, which is just an action step or a challenge that will help you be like the best. The workbook is just all of the Be Likes combined into one place with room for notes. So you can go to ContinueFit.com, you can get the books on Amazon, or you can go to BeLikeTheBest.com. All right, today on the StrengthCoach.com Coach's Corner with Coach Boyle, I spoke to Coach Boyle about Semi-Reactive Plyometrics. We talked about weight room competitions, how he doesn't like them, but how I feel like the running is a little bit of a competition that when he times kids, and his new article, New Thoughts on ACL Prevention. For the Results Fitness University Business of Fitness segment, Rachel Cosgrove is on to talk about non-compete clauses. Do we need them? For the Functional Movement System segment, Eric Dagati is on to discuss when is enough, whether that's strength, mobility, stability, whatever it is. For the Train Heroic Data-Driven Coaching segment, Adam Doughty talks to Tim Robinson. They finished their discussion on training to failure. Remember, check out trainheroic.com. Start your free 14-day trial. Let them know I sent you. You'll save 10% off your first year of the Train Heroic Pro or Elite Edition. For the Body by Boyle Online.com, hit the gym with the Train Coach segment. I got on Joel Jamison. He's the author of Ultimate MMA Conditioning, as well as the Ultimate Guide to HRV Training. His new product is called the Morpheus. He has the Bioforce conditioning certification. So we got a long conversation. This is a long one. I think we went an hour. We talked about conditioning. We talked about HRV, developing an aerobic base, understanding heart rate zones, why training in the gym with weights and aerobic training are not the same, even if the numbers look similar. We talked about deloading and tapering and using the Morpheus, his latest monitoring tool. A lot of what I'm doing with my rowing competition I have coming up on March 1st. We talked a lot about that throughout the conversation too, just to use it as an example. So long one today, lots of things to get to. So let's get on the phone with Coach Boyle. All right, now it's time for the StrengthCoach.com Coach's Corner with Coach Boyle. StrengthCoach.com, the world's best source for strength and conditioning information. You can try it out 3 days, just $1. You have access to all the articles, videos, and programs, as well as the best forum on the net. It's the only place to have full access to Coach Boyle. He's on every single day answering questions. You can check it out at StrengthCoach.com. Coach, how you doing?
I'm doing great, Ian. How are you?
Doing great. Loving the new, we all saw and we talked about this last time on, all the flooring work you did. But I got a chance to see it. Great job on that floor. The house is looking great.
Thank you. Most everybody, I'm sure if they follow the flooring podcast, they would have already heard most of this, right? So
True.
That's
true. We're gonna
I don't know what episode that was, like episode 1 of the Strength Coach Flooring podcast.
Yes, and we're gonna get some guys from Home Depot.
I guess I should mention that that's a joke so that we don't get any inquiries about where they find the link. Okay.
Exactly. Good. Let's go to a video you posted on Instagram. You were talking about semi-reactive plyos. I just wanted you to expand on this because you said we like a bounce phase, quote unquote, prior to a true reactive phase to expose the tissues to a more gradual transition from stable to eccentric emphasis landings to true plyos. The reality is that most of our plyos are really just jumping and hopping drills. The explode off the ground stuff is good in theory, but brakes are as important as accelerators. Just give everybody an idea of what goes on in this bounce phase and expand on this a little bit.
So, this is really the same plyo stuff we've been doing forever, but we've just gotten a little bit better. I think what we're trying to get people to understand, if you think about real, what I would call real plyos, it's like be like a super ball, react to the ground, explode off the ground, that kind of stuff. And from the very beginning, and this goes back, I have to give credit where credit is due. This was a Vern Gambetta thing very early on. But if I went back to that, if people immediately started doing that, that's why you had all the patella tendonitis problems. That's why there was so much stuff kind of out there about plyometrics being dangerous and people being hurt doing plyos and all these other things that they talk about. So we went initially, our plyos per se, like people say, that's not a plyo. A box jump's not a plyometric exercise because there's no real reaction to the ground. You start on the ground and you land on the box. It's a jump or a hop. If you went up on one leg, it's a hop, but it's technically not plyometric. You are not trying to exploit the stretch reflex to produce more power. And we just always realized, or a long time ago after kind of listening, Vern probably said this, I would say late 80s, early 90s. And I thought, he's right. If we don't want these guys with tendonitis, then we probably need to be more conservative and we need to just worry about jumping, hopping, bounding, and not really worry about plyometrics per se in terms of the rapidity of our reaction to the ground, how little time we spend on the ground. So the video of Megan, and that's Megan Keller, who's on our women's Olympic team, a really good athlete. If you look at her, she's a 6-footer. She's 6 foot, 155 or something in the video. Is what we would call a bounce phase. I always think we want to gradually introduce this idea of eccentric to concentric switching, but we don't want it to be that kind of rapid react to the ground because most people don't. It's what the good people do naturally, but the average person isn't able to do. So we kind of bridge through that phase. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. Basically, it's just trying to, regress it almost a little bit to kind of make sure we're being safe.
Exactly. And I think that like that bouncy, that's the thing that we talked about even in that last staff meeting. The one thing you realize is that people who are, and whatever we want to call them, we've toyed around with different words, elastic, reactive, bouncy. I don't know what the right word is. And, people now stiffness, like there's all these terms that we throw around that kind of are talking about the same thing. So we need to be able to look at this and think, all right, what are we really talking about? And it's the thing. It's what really good athletes have that really not good athletes don't have.
Yeah. Good stuff. Coach, I want to go over, because I actually jumped in on this for the philosophy weight room competitions. And my question to you was, you always say that you don't like competition. I totally get it. But when you're timing, doesn't everyone know what times everyone else ran when you train them? It's not like you're keeping them a secret. So these guys are going to get online and be like, oh, what you get. So technically they are still competing. So there's definitely going to be some stuff, even though you're not promoting it. Can you just answer to that piece of it?
Yeah. Well, the thing is, you're absolutely right. It kind of is a little bit of a philosophical violation for me, in terms of, yeah, you're right. I don't love it from that standpoint, but I guess it falls into kind of the necessary evil category in terms of there's no way around it. That's why, but like, it was interesting. And I should have added this to the thread. Tony Holland talks about record, rank, publish. We record, but we don't rank and publish. So it's not like we're sticking it up on the wall. And if I had a team, in all honesty, if we were in a team situation, I would be doing record, rank, publish. So if it was at BU, I'd be putting those results up on there because I'm not worried about if the slowest guy gets his feelings hurt. Something, you're the slowest guy, you deserve to get your feelings hurt. Get faster.
Well, you had a board up right by your office, didn't you, with all the numbers?
Yeah, we did. We had all the numbers up. But I think in the for-profit strength and conditioning world, my thing with a lot of the one, when you start doing competitive stuff, it generally leads to deterioration of technique because people start worrying. It's kind of like the CrossFit thing. Am I worrying about how many I can do or how much I can do, or am I worried about how well I'm going to do it? Those two things don't necessarily blend really well together. And so we need to be conscious of that. And the good thing about sprinting, it doesn't matter. We found, particularly the way that we're doing it, we've literally, when I say zero injuries, we're really close to zero injuries. We've had maybe a couple of, oh, my hip's a little sore, my hamstring's a little sore. We haven't had any really major injury issues with the sprinting stuff that we're doing. So it's safe, but there is some chance, there is kind of that negative self-esteem piece that we have to live with that, because the rest of this is so good. It's so, I've said this all along. I can't tell you how many times I've said, but this is the game changer. I was just talking to some people about this as an on ice thing. I think we're missing the boat when we're not timing. And the hockey coach that I was talking to said, yeah, you see some guys, when you say we're going to do starts or takeoffs or whatever, there's some guys who go 100% fast as they can. He said there's other guys who just, whatever, if you say do 5, they do 5. And maybe they do them at 80%. And that's what we found with sprinting, was that it just wasn't a situation where we got 100% effort like we wanted to all the time from every person. When that timer's out, it's 100% effort from every person every time. Like every rep, no one mails it in.
So you did answer in that thread. You said, I sometimes think about an occasional race. Talk to us. What would that look like? What are your thoughts? What are you thinking about that?
Well, if you've really read Tony's stuff, one thing he does, which isn't really a race, but it's the gauntlet, where he lines everybody up and everybody's cheering and screaming. And he said, they always get PRs in the gauntlet. And then the other thing is just, okay, we'll put 2 guys in. The bad part is we're only going to get time on one of them. We just have to decide who it is. But we could start taking kids. Okay, if I know, like, say, if I've got 2 kids who both consistently run 1:39, all right, let's stick them against each other and see what happens. Do we get a 1:37 when somebody's trying to win? Because the good thing is that competitive part is beneficial. The bad thing is that it may cause somebody to try to obtain a gear or achieve a gear that they probably maybe shouldn't be accessing.
Yep. All right.
I think I called it an extraneous variable. No, confounding variable in my last presentation when I talked about this. I said we want to eliminate confounding variables, and another person is a confounding variable, because suddenly that now we've got someone. Are they going to look over their shoulder? What are they going to do when they realize they're running against somebody else? And does that cause them to do something other than what we want them to do? So we don't do it. I said, I think about it. We don't do it. I think about it.
Coach, you actually, there was, you posted an article about the ACL epidemic continues, but it did morph into a little bit, it's not a side topic, but you really, I told you, I think this should be an article, and you've been working with Marky and his group, and you have a female in the group. Anybody that follows you knows who that is. And it's been really eye-opening. Can you talk to us about what you've seen over these last 3 or 4 years, having her in the group, and what's transpired?
Yeah, so basically what we see with our females is that our females gain, and I use the term non-propulsive mass. So as a female goes through puberty, the changes in the female body are generally not propulsive. In other words, the mass that they gain is not muscle, or the majority of the mass that they gain as they go through puberty. That women get their hips change, their breasts change. There's changes in a woman's body that does not make her a better sprinter. Mm-hmm. Whereas the men, the males, boys, whatever they are, they're gaining muscle mass. And I actually have this. I'm going to look at on the 12th of February. I'm going to weigh everybody in, because I have weights on 3 of the kids, Mark, and 2 of the kids that started early. I have weights from 2019, and I want to see what their weight gain was, because the reality is Mark has gotten a little bit slower in the last, say, 9 months, and it's really negligible in terms of, let's say, I think he was best flying 10 was 119, and he ran a 122 the other day. But when we go back to like the Brian Mann idea, the sprint momentum idea, if he's 20 pounds heavier, if he's 158, and we put in 119 versus 122, then we start looking at that and thinking he's actually probably more powerful. and I haven't. I can. You know what I'm going to do? I have the spreadsheet right in front of me, so I'm going to actually pull it up and tell you whether I'm right or not. I'll just do it at 2 different balls. I'll do it with 20 pounds difference. So if I take Mark and I make him 138 pounds, which is what he was last year, and then I take his best 10 time, which was 147, and he gets 390. We talked about this units, whatever those units are, Newton meter per seconds. If we make 158 at the same time, he goes all the way up to 446. So it's a big jump. If we take him and make him a little bit slower, so I'll just make him 149 just as a for instance, he's still 440. So he's still significantly more powerful. I mean, by a long shot when he has 20 pounds more body weight. And that's the stuff. So when we're looking at our young females, there's a really concerted effort for them to keep their speed through this puberty process. Can we take, because like I said, Mia, the girl that we're talking about, she was the fastest in the group at one point, or very close, like she was top 2. And then the boys start getting bigger and stronger, and the changes that are occurring for her are not necessarily on the bigger, stronger side. And she's held really firm, and she actually now is a teensy bit faster, like she's run some PRs lately. But it's I just feel like that's an area where with your young females, you can really do some good by knowing, okay, I know how fast they were. I know what their body weight was. And, we get into the measuring body weight, okay, good or bad, but I think it becomes a little bit of a necessary evil, particularly if I'm coaching female teams. I do want to measure body weight, and I want to know, I have to accept the fact they're going to gain weight. I mean, this is puberty. Bodies change, and those changes, as I said, are not generally muscular changes. That's just freaking reality, and it's hard because we have to dance around it a little bit. But it's a topic that needs to be discussed. I'm going to talk about it a little bit in my training kids talk, because when people talk about, hey, what's the difference between training males and females? And this is one area where I'd look and say, well, this is a big difference when we start talking about training males and females, is realizing that our females are going to be at a little bit of a disadvantage. Maybe a lot of it.
So first of all, that talk is on Perform Better, the one day, and then at the summits, right?
Yes, exactly.
Okay. Also, you said she was as strong as the strongest and fastest male. How has her strength held up?
Her strength has actually held up really good, with the exception of, and I think I said that in the thread, but bench press is where she's falling behind the boys. And, whether, again, is that a narrower shoulder girdle? I'm not sure. She's still strong. You're talking about, she can bench 90 for 5, which it's not like she's still stronger than some of the boys. But in the beginning, she was as strong as the strongest boy in everything. But when we look at the clean, she's ripping off. I mean, she can clean. I think if I test her, she could probably clean 135 for a single as a 15-year-old, 120-pound female, which is, you're talking about moving some load.
Yeah.
And there's probably only 2 of the boys that can do that. So she's still probably in the top 3 or top 4 if we've got about 10 kids that are in that group. And again, like I said, all good athletes, most of them pretty good 2-sport kids. So it's pretty interesting. I actually just cut that into a Word document so I can try to weave it into an article.
Cool. Mike, on that note, just kind of made me think. I know, let's say 20 years ago, that Mia would have really intimidated some of the boys in the group. Now, MBSC has always been a place that's had top female athletes in it for over 20 years. So are any, what's the difference now? Are the boys, is there any kind of oh man, I got to catch up to Mia? Because it doesn't seem to be like that anymore, which is really a great thing, because more girls are training, more young ladies are training. And, we know there's so many strong females now. It's just kind of the norm. So what's that dynamic been like in the gym?
I think there's still a little bit of that sometimes, where the boys will look and be like, okay, I think if anything, to me, the type of females that we have around now are really motivating. So Mia is the perfect example. When you look at Mia, so yesterday she does, 5 reps at 15 pounds in the chin up. If I'm a boy, I'm looking and thinking, okay, I got to be able to do that because she can. So I think our strong females are really, really good for our males. And again, I'm not going to get too worried about, as I've said before, I do worry about self-image. I do worry about trying to create an environment where kids feel good about themselves. But at the same time, I think there's some realities. And if there's some really talented women around, you've got to look at it and think, something, these are really talented women. And when you come in and watch, anybody who watches our women lift, our like our Olympic level women or whatever it is, kind of walks away like, wow, it's hard to not be impressed.
Yeah, it's cool, especially
motivated.
Yeah, it's cool too. Seeing you've been showing some videos too. We just had the NHL, AHL All-Star Weekend. You're seeing the ladies in there. You're seeing how fast they are. You're seeing how good they are. All good stuff.
It is all good stuff. It's great.
All right, Coach. We will let you go on that note. Thanks for doing this. Hope the rest of the move goes well, and we'll talk to you next time.
All right, I'll talk to you tomorrow for the flooring podcast.
All right, hey guys, right now at Perform Better, they got free online shipping, no minimum order. Free online shipping, no minimum order. Check that out at performbetter.com. Also, the one-day seminars are coming February 8th in LA. Then they're at Austin, Orlando, Boston, and Chicago. They just announced the 3-day functional training summit dates. Orlando, Long Beach, Chicago, Providence. I will be speaking in Long Beach and Chicago, so I'm pretty excited about that. Remember, you can check out performbetter.com for all their products and info on their educational seminars.
Welcome to the Functional Movement segment. My name is Eric Dagati, and today we're going to talk about when is enough, meaning how much mobility, stability, strength, etc. do we really need? In the performance world, everybody is constantly looking for more. But what we should be asking is what is optimal rather than what is maximal, since all attributes have the point of diminishing returns where more may not lead to improved performance and may actually take away from other resources, most importantly, time. And we need to not lose the forest through the trees. As Dan John famously said, keep the goal. Or a story that Gray Cook jokes about is that a guy goes into a nutritionist and he's got a cigarette in his mouth, he's got a glass of scotch, and he asks, what's the best essential fatty acids that I should take? We're missing the point here sometimes, and that we need to remember that when we train to get better, not to get better at training. And so what we're going to do is we're going to work through the movement continuum and see where this gets lost, starting with mobility and working our way all the way through to endurance. When we look at mobility, the marker I look for is that you can achieve at least a 2 in the FMS. And then once you can do that, move on. I can't tell you that we have any research that shows that getting you from a 2 to a 3 is going to improve your performance, except for mobility required for specific sport or activity demands. So one example would be my friend John Tureen, who used to look for a 3 in the inline lunge with his skill athletes in the NFL as one of his return to play measures. Or I've also worked with high-level ballroom dancers who they're graded subjectively on their movement quality. And so anything like that, gymnastics where movement quality is making a difference in your scores, that may be a reason to try to go a little bit higher. Or if you have extreme range of motion demands, such as in golf or in baseball, that's where a specific screen like the TPI or the on-base U screen would fit in. Because a score of a 2 on the shoulder mobility in the FMS, that's not sufficient for a baseball pitcher. But the extreme arc that we look for with baseball pitchers is also unnecessary for most other activities and may actually be detrimental to some activities. So once we get a 2, now it's time to move on to stability and motor control. The preferred measure I use here is the Y balance test or the motor control screen, as well as the trunk stability push-up and rotary stability. Once we've achieved passing scores there, again, getting more motor control and doing more and more balance exercises may or may not improve your performance, and that probably is not your issue. But we also need to understand the interplay in that a stability deficit could be due to mobility restrictions or vice versa. But once we create the stability, now it's time to go on and build strength. Strength now has a lot of different ways that it can be measured. There's several lists of kind of gold standards that I like to use, especially in unilateral strength before progressing into some of the bilateral work. And there's some great lists out there. If you look up Joe DeFranco or some work that John Rusin and Chad Waterbury have done, or Dan John or Charles Poliquin, they have some strength standards that they look for in terms of balance, front to back, top to bottom, right to left, as well as specific markers you should be hitting based on body weight or based on max numbers. And once I can get someone to those numbers, I can pretty much be sure that the strength is not going to be their limiting factor. Well, now we get into power. When I measure power, that's where I look at the FCS for global athleticism and force control. And then I can also look into others more sport-specific or activity-specific testing, such as some of the TPI power tests, or a lot of the measurables in baseball, as an example, such as exit velocity or arm speed. But the question then is, when we look at sports that are demanding of power and so forth, the question is, do you even need it? Is that even your most limiting factor? And if we are trying to develop it, how do we know if it's improving if you don't have a baseline? So a big one with me when I work with football teams is they want to do power cleans. And my question is the time it's going to take to coach that exercise is going to be worth the output or the reward that you're going to get? And then if we do improve in the power clean, how do we know that we're just not getting good at the exercise and we actually are improving power? We also have to consider your plane of movement and the direction of your force. There's been some great research looking at comparisons of using hip thrust, which is a more horizontal movement, versus squats, which is more vertical, and its correlation with sprinting, and finding there was a little bit stronger correlation with the hip thrust because of the direction of force. Now, there's general physical preparation, and then there's also more specific measures, and that's why we have to kind of look at what is it that we're really looking to get out of this in terms of our specific performance outcomes. Because if not, we have a lot of non-specific markers out there. If you look at the NFL Combine, we're still benching 225 pounds for max repetitions. And we have a lot of really high performers in that don't end up becoming the best players on the NFL field. Then you have guys like Tyrann Mathieu, who got 4 repetitions, but yet had a great football career. So we have to make sure that the measures match the outcomes we're looking for. Then rounding it off, we have endurance. And endurance is one of the most abused ones I find with coaches, even though that's not usually their limiting factor. I always ask coaches, how many games did you really lose because of your conditioning? Or how many games did you lose because someone went offside, someone ran the wrong play, someone didn't hit the cutoff, or someone didn't do something tactical or strategic properly? But yet we're spending a lot of our valuable practice and training time running poles and gassers when that's not really the outcome we're looking for. So other than developing an aerobic base, we need to make sure that our training is specific to the energy demands of our sport. And that most research also shows that beyond 6 to 8 weeks, you're not really gaining any significant improvements. So count back that much time, and that's where we start to enter more and more increased endurance work. And other than that, let's save that time for some of the other physical attributes you want to develop. So in summary, let's achieve baseline markers for general physical preparedness, make you an athlete first, and then layer some specifics on without sacrificing the other attributes, meaning let's not gain strength and lose mobility that we worked hard for, or build a bunch of endurance while we develop a bunch of musculoskeletal issues from overuse things. The key is don't chase numbers that may sacrifice durability. You don't want to have the fastest 40 in the training room, and no one ever scored a goal, hit a home run, or won a match from the treatment table. Thanks as always for listening. My name is Eric Dagati. Make sure you check us out at functionalmovement.com for more information.
All right, now it's time for the Results Fitness University Business of Fitness segment. I'm here with Rachel Cosgrove. Rach, thanks for doing this.
Absolutely. Always a good time.
All right. Well, this question came up for non-compete clauses on the forum, and should we have them? Is it worth it? For me, I always, and this came from the bar business because I worked in these really very kind of cool upscale bars that were owned by a guy who kept opening more. And so everybody always wanted to work at the new hot bar. And, but it just so happened the place that I work, wherever I managed, the staff didn't want to go to that new bar. They wanted to stay with me because I felt like they knew. They were like, you know what? I've done this before. I have it really good here. This is a great place to work. I'm not going to go to a new place. It's mayhem. You never know what's going to happen in a new place. And so I always had this quote, you can't steal my bartenders, but I can lose them. And I say the same thing with clients in the fitness industry. I'm like, look, you can't steal my clients. It's impossible, but I can lose them. And one of the ways that I felt like, how do I not lose them is I have unique selling points within my gym. I make it a great place to work. I do so other people who are the customer coming in is going to say, I don't want to work out in my basement and have this guy come over, 3 times a week. And even though I'm going to save, $100 a month, it's going to suck. I like going to Results. I like the smoothie bar. I like everybody's so nice to me over there. They have everything I need. They're always updating the equipment. But we're still going to lose people no matter what. We're still going to lose employees. Employees are going to leave and they might take a couple clients, just the way it is. So what are your thoughts on non-compete clauses? Do you have them for employees? How do you guys set this up?
We do. We have non-compete and non-solicitation policies that they sign when they come on board with us. We also have intellectual property. So anything that we do create at Results Fitness while they're an employee of Results Fitness, while they're, part of our team, belongs to us. So that's something else to think about is, because we're a real innovative company. So we're always looking for, new things to create for the industry. And so, if they're a part of that, that's another piece that we do have them sign that basically, as we're creating stuff and working together, if you leave, that belongs to us.
What's the non-solicitation though? What's the difference between and the non-compete?
The non-compete. So non-solicitation is that if they quit your gym and they are not allowed to reach out and contact your clients. So non-compete would be where they're not allowed to set up shop up the street.
Okay.
Right. So a non-compete is very hard to hold. Like it's hard to enforce that because people have the right to make a living. And so it's very hard in most states to tell someone they can't, go set up a gym 2 blocks up from you and open. That's something that you won't be able to enforce that necessarily. We still do it. We don't enforce. We try to enforce it, but we don't necessarily. We still have them sign it. I think it's just a good conversation to have when someone comes on board with you, and so it's just a matter of for us, we do have them sign that non-compete just to explain to them, hey, we're going to be doing this is a team. We all work together. We're all here, for one common goal. And so we just ask that you sign this, basically that you're not, while you're working here, going to start working at any of the gyms within a 5-mile radius, so that they know that, you're aware of it, right? So that it's something that they've agreed to. And hopefully if they're a good person and they're, they hold your core values, they've made you a promise, they're not going to do that, and so that could be not even while after they quit, that could actually be while they work with you as well.
Yeah.
Right. So I think it's just a good thing to put into place to have that conversation. Non-solicitation, this one you can enforce because absolutely when they leave, your database belongs to you. And, I've heard, people talk about how if you took away my entire business and you it was all gone and I had nothing except for my database, like you're talking about with your, your bartenders or the customers that came into your bars, right? But if you gave me that list of people and, I could contact all of them, then I know I could have my business up and running within a week, right? Because I know that if I reached out to all of them, I have a good relationship with them. They trust me. They want to know wherever I'm at. Yeah. And so that database is, your property as a company. That's one of the most, and a lot of us don't think about that, but that's one of the most valuable assets that your company has is your contact list, your database. And so you do want to protect that and you want to, it's something that, That's why we like all communication to come through Results Fitness. They don't use their personal cell phones to contact clients. It comes through,
Interesting.
we,
Okay.
we use Scipio. It's an app, so all text messages happen through a Scipio app, so that if trainer's reaching out to a client, I can log into the app and I can see every conversation that's going on, between our trainers and our clients, because those are our clients, and they're part of our team. And so we're all, we all are, helping out these clients. But if that trainer leaves, those are still, we still own those clients. And if you were ever going to sell your business, that would be one of the things you'd be selling, would be your client database. That's part of your assets as a business. And so it is important to protect that. And it is important to have things like non-solicitation policies in place, because you work hard to build that database. That's, all of the time, energy, and money you've invested in marketing, all the time, energy, and money you've invested in relationships, all the time, energy, and money, you've put into your business to create a great place and attracted those people. It's not something that was handed to you. It's something you worked very hard for. And so you want to protect it. And so I think it's important for any business owner to have a non-solicitation policy in place. And that just, is asking an employee that when they do leave your company, that they are legally not allowed to take any of the contact information of your database because it belongs to your business. And so I think that's something that's important to have.
Rach, now, the thing, I think a lot of listeners are here. They're single operators. They got one or two people. They got an assistant, maybe one trainer. They're small operation. Like, I don't want to pay a lawyer this much money. How much? Like, this has to be done through. You can't just find can you just do it, you think, through a template, or should you really have your lawyer look at it? Because everybody's different. I mean, and so like this is going to cost $4,000 or $5,000 just to set this up.
If you're, in your state, I think you could, if nothing else, at least use a template and have something that you have your employees sign. Like, if you're not ready to pay the money to have a lawyer on retainer, then, you're not at that point in your business. Still use a template and have something that they sign, just that you protect yourself. You have to protect your business. Like, and I think, because we're so emotionally attached to our business, sometimes we forget that, to be the hardcore business person that does, like, these are assets that you have worked very hard for, and you can't not protect them. I think that's very important to have that in place and to enforce it. And so you're running the risk of, if you do use a template, and if you get a copy of someone else's, maybe that you signed someplace else, and you use that, then you then, when push comes to shove, and if you do have an employee who does end up soliciting your clients, and you want to enforce it when you hire a lawyer, at that point, you may or may not be able to enforce it, depending on if your non-solicitation is written properly.
Yeah. But I think it sets up a scare. Like, it's almost like a scare tactic. I hate to put it that way, but at least somebody knows, like, hey, we're thinking about this. We're looking at this. Hey, even the fact that you're using Scipio, like, doesn't mean I can't try to steal those things, but still, like, I'm going to get caught. It's like we're getting filmed with everything we do now, right? And so it's a similar idea.
Yeah, and like you're saying, like, you should build relationships with your employees, that they're going to stay. This isn't going to be a problem. But after 20 years of business, I hate to say that I'm jaded, but I've had a lot of employees come and go, and we've had great relationships with most of our employees, but we have absolutely had more than a couple of employees that decided to go open their own place, or do it in their garage, or, they think the grass is greener. And in that case, when they try to contact our clients, absolutely, we will enforce our non-solicitation policy.
All right.
To protect our business, because I said to protect our business. And
of course.
That's why we've been here 20 years. Like, that's, you got to do that in order to protect what you've built.
Absolutely.
You worked hard for it. So not really a fun topic, but definitely something that's necessary.
Yeah. All right, Rachel, there's so much that, people need to think about in this stuff. And that's why we do this segment. So thank you so much for coming on.
Absolutely. And thank you for having me. And just so everyone knows, if you did want to come out and spend 3 days with us at Results Fitness and see the ins and outs of how we run the gym, we do have a mentorship coming up in February 2020. Head over to resultsfitnessmentorship.com. You can fill out an application there, and we hope to see you there.
Do they have to fill out a non-compete or anything like for? I'm just kidding.
Hey, this is Adam.
This is Tim.
Welcome back to the Train Rook Data-Driven Coaching segment.
Yeah, baby.
We're going to wrap our little series here on training to failure by talking about ways to know how far you are from failure without getting there.
Yeah, and just, a little disclaimer here. Remember, folks, everyone you're training, all of our coaches out there, all of your clients, your athletes are different. And a lot of this is contextually based, right? If you're training athletes, they're going to have sport practices, and that's training, right? You're essentially a multi-sport athlete. If you have someone who's only training twice a week, maybe remote, they have a lot more time to recover and things of that nature. So training to failure is really kind of contextually based. And you got to keep that in mind when you're driving these athletes through. So don't take this, kind of take this with a grain of salt, but apply it when necessary, I guess. So why is this important? That's what I'm getting at. That's what I'm getting at.
So why do we think this matters?
Yeah, exactly right.
Well, so we talked a couple times back how there's evidence that training to failure does cause more muscle damage and, delay recovery.
Sure.
And so like you said, if you're training twice a week, you can probably get away with quite a bit.
Yeah.
But if you're training with higher frequencies in any sense, then it starts to matter more.
Sure.
Where, either I'm a power lifter and I'm trying to train with higher frequency for either skill acquisition or hypertrophy might be one reason to do that. Or if I'm just, I have sport practice.
Yeah.
Right. If I've got training on Thursday and I've got some kind of event on Saturday, probably just don't want to blast somebody.
Yeah. Absolutely.
You still might want to train, but training as hard as you can probably isn't quite the right answer either.
Right. So if you're not training all the way to failure, like we've talked about or close to, what does an optimal solution look like? And I guess that's what we're talking about here. And there's ways to jump in and get that done without saying, hey, push as far as you can go until your body blows up.
Yeah. So so we read a couple papers, on this, we were looking into this, specifically with RPE or reps in reserve, you can kind of use them interchangeably there, is, once people get pretty close within a couple reps, one or two of a failure, they're pretty good at assessing,
right.
The
farther away you get from that, your more untrained lifters are going to have a much harder time pinning down, I had 5 reps left. 4
Dude,
reps
I've got no clue. I have no clue. I start to do the math in my head about what percent it is and probably where it is because I don't know.
Yeah.
That's honestly the truth with me. So in my own programs, I don't use much 8s and 9s quite a bit, and occasional 10s.
Sure.
But below that, 7's kind of I don't know. I never use below that, honestly.
Right.
If I'm going to prescribe technique or speed work that's really far from failure, I just use percentages.
Yeah.
I might singles or doubles at 80%, right? Something like that. Where it's it's heavy enough to practice and it's not that close to failure to matter, for recovery so much.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think there's some good stuff out there on that. I think Mike Teixeira is one of the best people to look up. If we're if you guys want to go research this, go look up some of Mike's stuff. What's his thing called? Reactive systems?
Reactive training systems. So he's the RPE guy.
Sure.
And so we have to give him full credit. He's the godfather of that in resistance training, at least. Yeah. And so, but one of the things he says, who it works for. He used to build all his programs almost solely on RPE. There's almost nothing preset in terms of loads or reps or sets. What if the people loads of sets, that is,
don't know their RPE or how many reps they got in reserve? Adam, what do you do?
He said it was good for those it was good for the controlled aggressive type. So
love it.
And so that's the person who's they want to work hard, so you have to want to get better.
Yeah.
If you just always assess things as being hard, you're not actually trying, then it doesn't work.
Right.
But I also have people on the other end where they're just gluttons for punishment and nothing's ever hard enough.
Yeah.
That isn't going to work very well.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. What are some? So if you have people on those opposite ends of the spectrum, what can you do? Maybe give them some objective measures to make sure they are on course. You know what I mean? Instead of giving them subjective, how do you feel? What can you do to replace that?
Well, it's RPE is subjective, but as just said, it can be pretty accurate. So I don't want to demean that at all. I might like it quite a bit.
Yeah, sure.
But you could also not throw the baby out with the bathwater and just make sure being smart with percentages, right?
Okay.
I'm sure I did some dumb stuff back in the day.
Didn't we all?
Maybe yesterday. No, but 4x6, 82.5%.
Sure.
Because I was your 6 rep max is 85%.
A little less.
So it's not to failure. Yeah. In the first set,
But
right?
you're saying maybe back off the percentage a little bit, give them some room.
You just like
the last set's gonna be harder than the first set.
Yeah. So you're gonna be closer. You're gonna accrue some fatigue and So if I did like 6s at 75% and the first set's at about 4 reps in reserve, and you can always adjust based on what the feedback or what it looks like after that first session. And so, the percents can kind of be a starting point there for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And then velocity-based training, right, is obviously another one. It's a little more objective. We're not all blessed with the ability to have those.
The best thing about velocity to me is I have a little open barbell device that I got a while back. And I pretty much just like to hook it on because it makes me just blast the bar harder.
Yeah.
Honestly, it makes me want to just push the bar faster.
Yeah.
But you can obviously use kind of like we saw in that study we talked about last time about those velocity stops.
Yeah.
I'd say, you're going to squat and not go below 0.45 or something.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
So that's one way to have an objective threshold for saying you're getting tired, stop.
Feedback is a huge part of this, Adam.
It is. That's going to do it for us today. Go to trainheroic.com to start your 14-day free trial. When you're talking to one of our representatives, tell them the Strength Coach podcast sent you for 10% off a year of the Pro or Elite Edition.
All right, now it's time for the Body by Boyle online.com. Hit the gym with the Strength Coach segment. Become an insider to Mike Boyle's strength and conditioning with staff meetings, in-services, and complete access to the MBSC programs. All right, today I have on Joel Jamison, best-selling author, conditioning expert, online educator who teaches coaches how to write science-based conditioning programs that deliver real-world results. After working with elite performers and top athletes worldwide, including Navy SEALs, lots of MMA guys, UFC world champions, all kinds of proteins. He's been sharing his conditioning principles and methods. He did it in his first book, Ultimate MMA Conditioning. He also wrote The Ultimate Guide to HRV Training. He's also had leveraged the heart rate variability technology in 2 fitness apps. First, Bioforce HRV, and now Morpheus. I've used both of them. So we're going to talk more about that later. And he also has the Bioforce conditioning certification. So we'll try to get to that at the very end. So Joel, thanks so much for doing this.
Yeah, no problem. It's been a while. It's been on. Thanks again for having me.
I know, absolutely. I know. So, I have this, I have my rowing, my 2K rowing world indoor rowing champion. Sounds bigger than it is for me. It's not really, I'm not taking part in any real competition, but they allow any schmuck to go and enter. So it's kind of fun. So I've been doing it for a few years. And Mike McKay, who you work with, my buddy who started the Heroes Movement, we were talking about some stuff, and he was mentioning that he was working with you, and I was like, yeah, I gotta get that again. I gotta get back into that and see, because we were having not an argument, but he was telling me what you were doing with him, and I thought, I gotta get Joel on here and talk about some of this stuff. We also had Dewey Nielsen was talking about some different things on in his social media about too many of us are working with intervals. We think everything should be high intensity training because there was some research out there that showed, and Coach Boyle kind of is a big advocate of that too. But he was saying that especially for endurance athletes, we're missing the boat with this zone 2 training. And I wanted to talk to you eventually about that aerobic base, which has been controversial for the most part. But Joel, first let's start out, because we throw the words like work capacity, conditioning, cardio, energy system development out. You use the word, conditioning a lot. Can you just define conditioning, how you define conditioning for us?
Yeah, and it's an ever-evolving definition for really for myself, as I've learned over the years how this all works. But I look at conditioning in terms of just the overall mental and physical preparation for somebody to compete or perform in whatever environment they're trying to compete or perform in, whether that's the game of life and you're just trying to stay alive and live a longer, healthier life, or it's a fighter trying to get in the octagon, trying to last from bell to bell from for 3 to 5 rounds, or it's a football player going out there that has to last all 4 quarters. So we have to look at the totality, and I really break it up into 3 sections. It's obviously energy system development that plays a key role in conditioning, but we also see a lot of people who look like they have great energy system development. If you were to test their VO2 max or test their anaerobic threshold, those numbers would look good, and yet they still can go gas out in a fight, or they can still go perform poorly in the 4th quarter, or whatever the case may be. So we have to look at more than just the energy system development. We also have to look at their movement capacity, because at the end of the day, if someone's movement's inefficient and their overall movement capacity is not good, it's going to take a lot more energy to do something. So they're going to eat through that energy a lot quicker, and they're going to fatigue a lot faster. And then third, we look at their mental performance, and not in the psychological way of motivation, those sorts of things, but more about, can they control their emotion? Can they control their heart rates? Can they, again, meet the demands of the environment without this massive adrenaline dump? So we have to look at really kind of the big three of those. And if you put them together, you get a really good idea of, how well someone's going to be prepared to go out and perform and use their skills and use their fitness. And that's the biggest thing is I think we have to differentiate between someone's fitness and someone's conditioning, which is really, at the end of the day, I would say, if you want to break conditioning down to its simplest tool or simplest definition, it's how well someone can use the fitness they have to accomplish something. And again, that something could be a sport, it could be just to stay healthy and deal with the stress of life, or really anything in between.
Great. Absolutely. Love that. And I did look over one of your articles. I know you teach this in your certification about this idea about movement capacity, adding to this whole big picture. And, obviously people do, we have the functional movement screen guys on here, but I loved, you have a great article on it too, about looking at it from a fatigue state. So it's not just this conditioning. Okay, we're going to get on, we're going to go do some runs. We're going to get on the erg. We're going to do on the bike. It's looking at really the total picture.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's something we often miss in the sport world is obviously we try to develop fitness, and a lot of times that does mean going to high intensity, or that does mean causing some fatigue to develop fitness qualities. But what we forget is we're always learning. I know our bodies are always learning how to move. And a lot of that happens just through training and feedback and coaching and everything else. So as we get fatigued, our natural inclination may be to let our technique fall apart. And if the coaches reinforce that by, oftentimes you just say, go faster, go harder, finish, or whatever the case may be. You're yelling out motivational things to get the person to go hard, but their technique is just degrading and getting worse and worse and worse. And then the problem becomes that's kind of their learned technique. They've learned to have poor technique as soon as they get tired. They've learned to have bad habits. And so we look at a lot of sports where, again, as you fatigue, technique is always going to be what wins. Technique is always what the whole point of skill, is develop better technique and execute that skill. So I think we have to realize that as we're developing these fitness skills through different intensities, we can't let that development hinder our movement and make us have sloppy technique. Because again, that's a lot of times what we see is as people get tired, their technique just goes completely out the window. But that doesn't have to be the case. That's a very trainable quality. And so when we're looking at movement and movement screens, it's certainly valuable to look at these low-level movement screens. But I think we also have to be just aware of movement at higher intensities and movement at higher levels of fatigue, and be screening and developing those qualities as well.
Absolutely. Love it. Let's stay on this ESD idea, and I'm going to kind of bring up that thread that Dewey was talking about, and it led Mike McKay and I were talking about some stuff. Mike from the Heroes Movement, and he was doing his event, and I was kind of training for mine, and we were talking about it. And what Dewey Nielsen had talked about was working in this zone 2. We don't get enough of that. And it kind of came up in the forum thread about this idea about aerobic base. But, like some people are still kind of saying, okay, that's we don't need that. You can just start out with a general capacity, and then, so let's get into intervals, because Gabala's work out of McMaster University has shown that the intervals are better. And again, this isn't just for endurance athletes, it's just in general. But I wanted to ask you about your thoughts on this idea about the aerobic base, or is there such a thing? Do we need one, or are we going to work in all of these different areas?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, it's funny. It's a controversial topic. It's really only been controversial the last, 5 or 6 years. And before that, it was pretty much just accepted the way that the endurance athletes and athletes needed aerobic fitness trained throughout the year, from higher volume, low intensities to higher intensities and lower volumes. And then suddenly the kind of the Tabata research and some of that, and Gabala kind of kicked it off and started this big cascade moving the other direction of, intervals are all you need, intervals are better. But look, the reality is, if you look at most of the research, in fact, you look at all the research, there's time constraints. They're 4 weeks or 6 weeks, or every once in a while I see an 8-week study. They're not any longer than that. So intensity is really just a driver of the acceleration of things. So yeah, if I have 4 weeks or I have 6 weeks and I'm testing point A to point B, then training harder over those 4 or 6 weeks is going to lead to better results in those timeframes. But if we look at the real world development over 6 months or a year or multi-year development, then you can't just do one intensity all the time. And I can tell you after years of looking at HRV data, looking at fighters, there is something to be said for higher volume training and greater frequency of training. And there is a need for that side of development because it stimulates different parts of the aerobic engine really than nothing but high intensity. So it develops the capillaries better. It develops more the blood vessel network more effectively. It plays a role in how the cardiovascular, the heart itself, gets developed through volumes. So, there's some good papers. If you look at, I think it's Seilers or Sailors, I can't remember the exact paper, but they looked at basically the distribution of intensity across endurance sports, across really globally in different countries and different sports, and found the 80-20 rule that basically 80% of endurance athletes training was done in that kind of zone 2 or below, and then 20% was done at those higher intensities. And that seemed to be a distribution that held true across almost any endurance sport in the world. And they looked at all kinds of gold medalists and world champions. And that seemed to be, again, a sign of a golden rule of, if you looked at their annual distribution of intensity, it was 80 to the lower end and 20 to the higher end. And I found that to be fairly applicable to most sports that, again, have a high aerobic demand. So, again, I'm not saying that high intensity training is not necessary or it's not effective, but I can tell you that if that's all you do, your development will ultimately be limited. You will be lacking some of the core foundational components of the aerobic engine that are necessary to drive it to the higher levels. And again, I can tell you that not just from people I've worked with, but at this point, looking at millions of data points of HRV, looking at how people distribute their intensities using Morpheus, and there's absolutely something to be said for spending time at lower intensities to develop qualities, whether you want to call it aerobic base or aerobic foundation, whatever it is you want to call it. There are qualities that are developed in the body that come from higher volumes at lower intensities, and if you don't ever do that, then again your aerobic development is capped. The question is just how much development do you need? If you're the average person, then you might be able to get away with it. But if you're trying to perform at a high level in a sport that needs a fairly high level of aerobic fitness, then you need to spend the time developing it. Otherwise, again, you are going to shortchange yourself.
Yeah, let me ask you though. So with Mike and I, let's just bring up that example. We're both rowing. He's got an 850 meter row. I had a 2K, and Mike was talking about, really look, you got to get in this lower heart rate for, it's got to be a lot longer. It's got to be 45. Like people were even calling it. I think Tim Vagan was calling it, I forget if it's the suck zone, because it really sucks to stay in that, low zone for 20K on the water, for example. They said Maffetone called it the patience period. And what he was saying is all of, what he was talking about, what Mike was talking about as well, is all of these top guys do a lot of they put, let's call them miles, but they put the mileage in. It's not like the best guys do this. They spend a lot of time in that zone. Can I ask you though, for where's that cutoff? I feel like the 850, is that really an endurance event? Is the 2K, is that an endurance event, or is the marathon an endurance event? Just give me what the parameters are there.
So if you look at the research and you look at kind of where the energy systems, break out, essentially you see if you run just maximum, say I'm gonna go run as fast as I possibly can and see what happens. After about 20 to 30 seconds, there's a crossover. So for the first 20 to 30 seconds, you will be predominantly anaerobic. Now, it doesn't mean the aerobic's not contributing, but you will be predominantly anaerobic for the first 20 to 30 seconds. After that point, the shift to predominantly aerobic energy comes into play. So after that, 30 seconds or so beyond, you will be predominantly aerobic. Now, because you were so anaerobic for the first 30 seconds, it takes up until around 50 to 60 seconds to where the total energy starts to be more coming from the aerobic side than the anaerobic side. So short answer is anything over about 60 seconds of max intensity is going to be predominantly aerobic. Now, that doesn't mean that the anaerobic systems don't matter, that they don't also contribute to a high level of that. But anything, again, if we look at 50 seconds, 60 seconds, 90 seconds, 2 minutes, the majority of energy for those types of events will be from the aerobic side. Now, of course, there's a difference between going for 2 minutes versus 2 hours, but both events are going to be predominantly aerobic. It's more just a question of how the aerobic system's functioning from aerobic power versus capacity over an endurance event. But Again, I would just say anything where you're saying, hey, I'm going 100% for 90 seconds, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, those are almost entirely aerobic pieces, aerobic components that are driving that entire thing. So if you're in that time frame, then the aerobic system is going to be a hugely important piece of it. And funny thing is, if you look at the average speed of 1 mile, and then you look at the average speed of a marathoner, they're not that different, actually. You're able to maintain, pretty high paces, not quite what you'd get for 1 mile, but for the marathon, it's not massively different to go 27 miles as it is to go 1. And the reason for that is because once you get to that mile pace, again, it's entirely aerobic. And when you're entirely aerobic, you can sustain that for long periods of time. So it happens a lot quicker than people often think it does, is the short answer.
Joel, what about this idea? So, for example, with the 2K, if I'm doing, some intervals, like I do, like say 500 meter intervals, I do 1,000 meter intervals, and then have a day of longer slow. So it'll be 4,000 to 4,000 meters at the lower heart rate. There's this idea about specificity. I think when we look at it, we're thinking, wait a minute, I should be just, how come I can't just do 2K every time? And I'm simplifying this. I'm not that stupid, but why can't I just do 2K every time? Shouldn't I be doing 2K? Because I gotta learn how to do that. How are the intervals and helping us in rest periods, within those rest periods, in between those intervals? Normally I would think, okay, the idea would be do my 500, let's say 500 meters, right? 4 intervals. Now, in the beginning, I might need 5 minutes of rest. And then I would taper that down, and eventually a lot of rowers, their big thing is this 500 meter with a 1 minute rest. If you can get that, if you're in decent shape, your heart rate's back down, cool, boom, we go again. Just talk to me about this idea about specificity and trying to maneuver around these different distances.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think again, it comes down to the difference between developing fitness qualities, which requires a range of intensities, because we're trying to develop different components of the energy and the aerobic engine and the anaerobic engine, depending on the sport within the body. Those happen at different intensities. So let's say I'm looking at, I'll use a strength sport just because people will be able to make that connection easier. Let's say I'm training for powerlifting, right? Powerlifting is 1 rep of bench, 1 rep of squat, and 1 rep of deadlift. So you could look at that. You could say, well, why don't I just max out every single rep, right? Why don't I just go in the gym and hit 10 heavy singles and walk out? Why don't I do that to develop strength? And most people would say, well, A, you're going to blow your joints apart if you try that. And B, there's something to be said for doing some higher rep work and some different exercises. So, we look at strength sports and we inherently realize, hey, well, powerlifting is just 3 lifts, 1 rep, but we train that using higher reps. We train that using different exercises. We use accessory lifts, right? We do higher rep stuff to try to get some muscle size. We look at hypertrophy. It's really the same thing if we're talking about the aerobic engine and aerobic sports. Yes, the sport might be 2K for a few minutes, but it doesn't mean only doing that is the ultimate way to develop the fitness qualities for it, because there's other intensities, which are the equivalent of other rep ranges, and there's other types of exercises that'll help us just develop the biological systems and the overall fitness qualities and capacities that we need to get better at that specific event. So I generally speaking, in programs I write, and Mike's an example, 1 day a week, we actually do a very close to competitive type scenario, again, to get the overall brain-body connection used to that distance and used to that pace and used to that feeling. So we do use specificity in training, but again, there's reasons and benefits to use other intensities, other types of intervals or slower intensities, and build, again, the fitness qualities we need to be able to then perform within that exact event. But again, I think it's easier for people to get that connection if you look at strength sports, because nobody, again, says, hey, why don't you go train for powerlifting by doing 10 1 rep maxes of bench, squat, and deadlift, and then walk out of the gym. I mean, no one does that, right? Yeah,
so true. So for example, one of the things I was listening to somebody talk about this idea. So like Mike's got the 850, I have a 2K. You're not gonna. Are you gonna is the intensity, like I've heard somebody say, like in that intensity, you want to do that, you want to get the feel for that 2K, that 850, whatever your distance may be. But let's say it's at 80%. You're never truly with that specific workout, the race day type of distance, you're not going to do 100%. What are your thoughts on that?
You talk about, in training, again, what I generally will say is the closer you get to the event, the more you want to try to simulate and recreate as many different parts of that event as possible. And that's where the psychological, the brain, mental performance comes in, because the more that your brain, the more that you're familiar with something, the more likely you are to perform well in it. So for Mike is a good example. He's going to go out and row in the water. He's not going to row indoors. Mm-hmm. So as we're further away from the competition, he can do more of his rowing indoors. He's going to use more varied distances and all those sorts of things. The closer he gets to the actual event, the more I'm having him simulate by going out in the water and rowing the exact distance. And then you can even get specific, like the time of day and the location you're going to be competing, if that's possible. You want to, again, the brain works by familiarity. The more familiar you are with something, the more times you've done something, the more you're going to be able to do it effectively. It's a great example is, UFC fighters, the guys that have been in the octagon more times, they're more calm in the octagon. They don't get these massive adrenaline dumps. They've been there. They can handle the pressure and the stress a lot better than the guy who's been there the first time. The first time you do something, it's a lot more stressful in the body because it doesn't know what to expect, and it's not as prepared for it because it hasn't seen it before. So again, we just have to look at the specificity idea that the closer we get to something that we're going to be competing in or doing for a reason, we want to try to simulate that. We want to try to get used to it. I mean, there's a reason that the home team wins more than the opposing team, because the home team is used to the environment, right? Yeah. The home team didn't have to travel. The home team would sit in their bed at night. The opposing team had to go to a new city, travel to a new hotel, sleep in a new bed, eat different foods, and compete and train in a different environment. So we just have to, again, we look at specificity in my mind is the closer we get to the competition, the more and more and more it becomes important. And that specificity means exactly everything about the competition, the time of day you're competing, the type of boat you're competing in, how the race or event's going to be set up, how much time do you have in between races, the whole process we have to look at and try to start to recreate and simulate those as much as we possibly can. Because again, if I did all my rowing indoors in a rower and I had these amazing times, but I'd never gone out and rowed in the water, I wouldn't do very well, even though I might have developed the same fitness qualities as somebody else. If I never used that on the water and I was not used to the actual environment of rowing a boat versus an erg, my performance wouldn't be nearly as good as somebody who spent their time training on the water and rowing that boat. So we just have to look at developing, again, the fitness qualities over the course of the off season, then transitioning into more specific training to be closer to the event, to transfer that and really develop the ability to use that fitness effectively.
That makes a lot of sense, and it helps me. It reaffirms what I've done the last couple of years in terms of having, like, the race day is a Sunday and having the Sundays as my test days, and not going full bore for the most part in the beginning, but knowing, like, last year my goal was to break 7 minutes in the 2K, and so I knew if I just got around, which my PR at the time was like a 7:08. I knew if I got around that time, if I kept like which would be a 1:47, 500 meter pace, I wanted to keep it there because I knew with the adrenaline and that day, but I was doing it on Sundays and I was doing it in the morning because the race is around 10:30. So that is something that I did do. And like you said, the closer you get to it, I felt like I needed to have that confidence to say, no, I know I've already been there. I can do it. I'm going to feel good. Adrenaline's going to take me over the top and I'm going to get my PR. And that's what happened last year. I did get my PR. So I felt good about it. But that was without doing some of these lower end heart rates. Let's call them zone 2, because that's all I knew at the time. I wasn't doing the zone 2. But my question for you is this: when Mike started talking to me about that, I should be doing more of that. What I think I told you, there's no way I'm going on an erg for 45 minutes. It's not happening in my brain. I'm not doing it. And I don't want to do it. So 20 minutes is probably the longest for me. So what I was doing is I was getting my ruck out, and, it's had like 30, 35 pounds in it. And I would do like this, like a 13-minute mile pace, which is pretty good for me. I'm 53 years old, so that's me pushing it, getting to like 110, 120, depending on my heart rate, depending on what if there was any hills. So I would do that for like 20 minutes. And then I would walk to my gym, get on the erg for 15 to 20 minutes at that, 120 heart rate. And then I would kind of scoot home. I live like 0.4 of a mile, get that fast walk. And then I would walk up the stairs really slow to keep my heart rate at that same 120. Is again, farther out, that's okay, right? Because I'm not worried about simulating that race day, but I'm still getting that heart rate in where I want it to be. It doesn't have to be on the specific tool that I'm going to use, right?
So we can break it down into a couple areas. So when we look at the aerobic engine and we look at those sorts of quality, we can look at two components. We can look at what we'd call the more central component. And the central component is things like how your heart is developed, how your overall blood vessel networks are developed, your fast twitch versus slow twitch muscle fiber distribution, those sorts of things. And those they're called central because they're really more generalized, meaning they will apply to a lot of different types of exercises. So let's say we took somebody like Lance Armstrong, for example, just because he's obviously a very well-known endurance athlete. He spent his entire career on a bike, but you can't tell me that he can't do well at other endurance events because he developed this massively high level of central aerobic fitness that can then transfer into other types of aerobic endurance events because, again, it's more generalized, it's more transferable. Now, then we have what we'd call more specific. So, again, using Lance, for example, obviously on a bike, he's using a very specific motion to pedal the bike, and he's developed very specific endurance in the legs and in the leg drive in the exact movement of the bike. That's a very specialized type of endurance, and that has to do with more of the movement pattern. So to perform at a very high level, you're going to need both, right? But that being said, for something like rowing, you can develop a lot of that generalized component, which is a lot of what the lower intensities are for. Yeah, doing varied exercises. There's no reason you can't. The only really thing I would say about it is people often mistake that you can't take this idea that heart rate is equivalent no matter what you're doing. Because if I'm doing a strength training circuit, my heart rate is higher, but the resistance of strength training is significantly different than going out for a jog or a ruck or a row or whatever. Because the resistance is so much higher, it drives my blood pressure up. And because my blood pressure is driven so much higher, it does cause very different changes within the cardiovascular system than if I'm out there doing more of a body weight type exercise. So we can't really take the, hey, heart rate, as long as your heart rate's in the zone, that's all that matters to infinitum. There is, some constraints to that. But yes, going out for a row versus a run versus sitting on a bike versus rucking, those things are all fairly equivalent from a resistant movement standpoint. So there's no reason you can't be using those to develop that sort of generalized fitness. And then you would get more the specific component of it from, the actual rowing and doing those sorts of rowing type movements over time. So I guess the long answer is, yeah, you can absolutely use more generalized exercises. And again, typically the way you do it is further out from the competition. Like you mentioned, you'd spend more time doing those sorts of varied movements and varied movement patterns. The closer you get towards the actual event, the more you're going to switch over to expending more energy doing the actual rowing and less energy doing non-specific type events. So again, we just have to kind of look at this big picture of periodization and planning and just realize that, the further out we are, the more we can spend developing these fitness qualities, doing different movements, and try to prepare the body by just building the internal structures and capacities that we need. And then as soon as we start getting closer and closer to the event, the more time we spend developing the specific movement patterns and the specific pacing and the specific fitness that we, turn into conditioning and we go compete.
Love it. Cool. So the argument that I'm getting my zone 2 during strength training is not a valid argument because, again, you said the blood pressure is going up. There's different physiological responses that are happening. It's not the same as getting that, doing that from other things.
No, I mean, if that were the case, then bodybuilders would be good endurance athletes, but they're not. So, I mean, Don't get me wrong, they have more muscle mass than average, obviously. But just because you're lifting weights and your heart rate's higher does not mean you're developing the cardiovascular system in the same way as if you're doing a body weight type exercise. So that those two are, again, as soon as you start driving, or look at the powerlifter. Powerlifters spend a lot of times at higher heart rates because they're driving their heart rate up to maximum when they're squatting. But do powerlifters have a massive aerobic fitness because their heart rates get high all the time? No, I don't think we would argue that. So we have to look at the, there is that other component of just if you're driving blood pressure high because the resistance is so high, it does cause very different effects because the heart and cardiovascular system has to resist, basically that high blood pressure and prevent the blood vessels in the heart from exploding. And then it causes the heart to contract basically in different ways. And that causes different changes in the heart itself. And you lead this whole cascade of effects. It just differs from more endurance exercise based movements.
Okay, great. That makes a ton of sense. So let me just, before I leave, my personal topic, there's always that saying, train slow, be slow, right? And I'm training like Sunday, I'm doing the slower, lower heart rate work. Monday, as I'm doing some 1 minute intervals times 8 to 10. And then Wednesdays, I'm doing 500s, and Fridays, I'm doing 1000s, and I throw strength training in between. I'm walking every day a lot. I take the stairs every day. Just comment on this idea about, but Joel, train slow, be slow. What will happen? I'm trying to get trying to get my PR. How I shouldn't train at that level, right? The closer that I get to the event.
Yeah, I mean, look, the closer you get to the event, then sure, you are spending more time at race type speeds, but that doesn't mean that's the only speed you go, or that your body is going to slow you down if you do anything other than race speed. I think the best example, kind of the easiest one to reference there, is Charlie Francis, since a lot of people in the strength speed world these days probably remember, Charlie Francis and Ben Johnson. He popularized and just talked about the high-low system, right? So if you look at he was talking about 70 to 80% of his overall work volume for his sprinters, which are the fastest guys in the world, were tempo intervals, tempo runs at 70% of their speed. And the vast majority of their overall volume when running was done at low speeds, and their 20%, maybe 30% towards the end was done at their high speeds. Now, did that tempo interval work slow them down? No, clearly not. They're the fastest guys in the world. If you look at, same thing, go out to Altus and you go watch Dan Paff. Is Dan Paff having his sprinters run a 100-meter sprint full speed every single sprint? No, you'd be out of your mind. You'd blow those guys apart if you tried that. So yes, there is something to be said for just, obviously the body's going to adapt to what you do. And if all you do all the time is you run slow, then your body will get better at running at those speeds for longer periods of time. But the idea that any submaximal work is going to all of a sudden slow you down, it just doesn't hold up. It's like saying if all I do is high reps, then I'm not going to adapt to the 1 rep max work that I was doing in the weight room. No, your body's going to adapt to the bigger picture of things. And as long as you're providing that high speed or high intensity stimulus, it's not going to slow down because you do anything else. It just doesn't work that way.
Okay, excellent. Joel, let's get into HRV now, because I want to talk about that. And let's just, obviously you've been on the show. It's been a while. A lot of people are familiar with that term, but let's just I heard you on, I think it was the Kabuki Strength podcast, do a great overview of HRV. So let's do that first before we get into it.
Sure. Hang on a second, you cut there for a second. Can you repeat that?
Oh yeah, just give me an overview of HRV.
Yeah, sorry about that. So HRV is something I've been using for close to 20 years now. Actually, I was first introduced to it back in the early 2000s. And when I first saw it, it was basically this laptop. They had a bunch of electrodes. They were plugging a bunch of stuff on my body and looking at all these numbers at a computer. And I really didn't know what it was doing. But over time, what you find out is that HRV is measuring essentially how the body is reacting to everything that you're doing to it, all the stress of your life, whether it's how you sleep or your nutrition, how much you train, how much mental stress you have. And the way that it's doing that is by measuring what we call the autonomic nervous system. And, everyone these days is familiar with the central nervous system. It's, it moves you around, and it's how you learn to move and function and develop, sports skills, all those sorts of things. But the autonomic nervous system is kind of the unsung hero. It's what keeps your body functioning. It's what drives energy into different areas of the body. It's what makes sure that your blood pressure and your body temperature and blood pH, all those things are doing what they need to do. And you don't have to sit there and think about it. It's just happening in the background. And so what HRV is doing is looking at where your body is distributing the energy. And it does that by measuring what's called the parasympathetic branch of the autonomic nervous system, which most people think of as the rest or digest. And the other half of that is the sympathetic nervous system, or the stress response system, or the fight or flight type system. Now, when we're doing something stressful, when we're lifting weights, or when we're dealing with a mentally demanding task, or we're just mentally stressed from whatever it is that's going on around us, that sympathetic system kicks up and that turns energy and basically distributes it towards our working muscles and towards our brain, and it makes sure that we have the energy we need. And when we see that happening, and then our parasympathetic system is kind of shut off or reduced. Now, on the other side of that, when we stop being stressed out, we have to put the energy back into repair and regeneration, and we have to rebuild and make our tissues bigger and stronger, and we have to, turn our immune systems back on. And when that happens, we see our parasympathetic system activate and go up higher, and we see the sympathetic system come down. And then, of course, when we're sleeping, we're largely in a parasympathetic state through different stages, and that's how our body basically repairs itself and it allows itself to be stressed during the day and then regenerate and rebuild during the nighttime hours, and we're not stressed out. So what we're looking at with HRV is the rhythm of the heart rate. And in that rhythm, we can basically pull out how active that parasympathetic nervous system is. So if we look at that on a daily basis, it's really just kind of telling us how much our body is spending its energy on recovery versus how much our body is spending energy on dealing with stress. And if we see this chronic imbalance where we see that the parasympathetic nervous system is not able to put as much energy into repairing itself as it's spending, on the other hand, being stressed, then over time, we're essentially going to see ourselves broken down. We're going to be more susceptible to injury. We're going to be more susceptible, to plateaus and to not improving. We're going to be more susceptible to cardiovascular disease over the long run, and we see correlations and all that. So, kind of as a whole, it's like a barometer. It's like basically measuring how well is your body recovering from everything you're throwing at it. If it's recovering well, then over time, you're going to see improvements in strength and power, endurance, whatever it is you're trained for. You're going to be healthier and all those sorts of things. And over time, if that's not the case and your body's not recovering well, then you're more likely to start to have chronic problems, whether those are injuries or lead down the path of cardiovascular disease, all those sorts of things. Because really, again, what we're looking at is how much energy does the body have to distribute towards recovery. And that's a hugely important thing because we throw so much stress at it on a daily basis that if we're not able to then recover from that stress, we're going to slowly break down over time. So that's really what HRV is looking at. Now, as a single number, what you're getting with HRV is just giving you this measure of parasympathetic nervous system function. And then these days, most apps, Morpheus, which is mine and some other ones, will take that number and help you interpret that a bit. So, if, as a single number, it changes on a daily basis, but it's more about understanding the long-term trends and how those things are, changing for you on a given day, and then what to do with that. That's important. So these days, like I said, most of the apps out there will do some of the heavy lifting and take that HRV number and then try to help you interpret it and do something with it.
Joel, just touch on this idea for people. I've seen it firsthand why HRV is a more important number because as opposed to just heart rate, because I've seen my resting heart rate is in the high 40s, so like 48, 49 normally. And my hangover heart rate is like 58 to 60. But if I don't have, if I have crappy sleep, which my dog had heartworm, and so she's on steroids, and in the beginning, like in these different cycles when she's on the juice, she had twice a day, and she's so thirsty and she was peeing, so it was like having a baby. I had to get up every 2 hours. And those days, I could show you my data, my HRV just was ridiculous. And my heart rate on those mornings wasn't that bad. It wasn't like my head was like 51, 52. So if I just used my heart rate, I probably would have been like, okay, cool, I'm fine. Just talk to us about that difference. I know some people out there, I don't need HRV, I could just use their heart rate.
Yeah, I mean, in general, heart rate is what I would call more of a lagging indicator, meaning if I do a bunch of stuff and I'm really stressed out, then eventually, I'll see my heart rate start to change. But HRV is more of a leading indicator, meaning a lot of times we'll see changes in HRV. For example, maybe you'll see your HRV tank, I feel fine, and then 2 days later you get sick. So HRV is just much more of a sensitive measure. It's much more of a leading indicator. So we see what's happening a lot sooner, rather than having to wait 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 days before we'd see a change in the heart rate that's meaningful. We'll see the HRV change, very, very quickly. It's just more, again, it's more sensitive. It's more responsive. So you're going to see that information more real time because you don't want to have to wait, 3 or 4 days before you realize, hey, my body's not recovering well. You want to be able to see that as quickly as you can so that you can, again, make that adjustment. And like you said, things like sleep make a huge, huge difference. Things like, obviously your nutrition and what you're eating, how much time you're spending stressed out at work, all those things make a massive difference. But again, those have to add up a significantly more amount to be shown through heart rate changes than they do through HRV. We just see it a lot faster, so we can make changes a lot quicker, and we can prevent some of those kind of accumulations of stress that start to really cause problems.
Absolutely. Good stuff. Joel, just talk to us about, I think a lot of people out there would say, well, I'm a strength and power athlete. I don't really need that. It's not specific to sport. Just kind of go over that idea.
Yeah. I mean, look, do you need to recover? Right. I mean,
Yeah.
do you need to get stronger? I think people often, just don't quite realize how important the recovery end of thing is, because that's where you actually make the gains, right? When you're in the gym, you're not physically getting stronger in the gym. You are providing a stress, and you're putting tension on the tissues, and those tissues are then getting broken down. The body then has to go in and repair those tissues and make them stronger, right? That's basically stress adaptation 101. That's how we improve. What HRV is measuring, again, is how much energy does your body have and how much is it using to repair that damage that workout did. And that's how the body gets stronger. So again, the whole reason people take performance enhancing drugs, what's the first thing they say? Hey, I can recover so much faster. My work capacity went up because my recovery increased. So we can't discount how important recovery is. I don't care what your goal, whether it's to get stronger, whether it's to be a bodybuilder and improve your physique, or it's to perform, or it's to live a healthier, just longer life. It doesn't matter. The recovery component is what drives all that. The training is what stimulates it, but the time that you spend recovering is where those changes and improvements actually happen. So I don't care what your goal is. It's just a matter of, do you want to have a way of measuring whether or not your body is responding in a positive way and putting energy towards increasing those capacities, or if it's not. And that's really what HRV is showing us. It's just showing us how much your body's able to spend in a recovery state, I would say. And the more time you can spend in that state and the more time you can train, the more you're going to improve whatever it is you're trying to improve. That's a hugely important component of driving that. So HRV is really just a way to see that and to measure it, rather than to wait for 4 weeks or 6 weeks and really see whether or not your max went up or your fitness improved. We can see that much more real time, because we can see whether or not the body is devoting the energy it needs to that area or not.
Excellent. I want to just take a little side turn here. It's the same, we'll segue from the recovery idea. I heard you talking about this with the strength chat with the Kabuki strength guys, and I was just fascinated about tapering and deload weeks. So I want to just get your thoughts on, can you go over what the mistake people make with deload weeks is?
Yeah, look, I think in general, we talked about this earlier. The body likes familiarity, and that pertains to the overall stress the body's under. It responds well to the same thing all the time. What it responds poorly to are large changes. So in general, if we look at how much volume and stress and training load someone's under, if we start fluctuating that largely from week to week, you end up with problems, and that means fluctuating up or fluctuating it down. If you look at, let's say an easy one to look at, let's say a training camp for sports. What's the most oftentimes people get injured, right? It's the first couple of weeks of a training camp, because it's this massive shift in volume intensity. They've been maybe running 3 days a week on their own, and now they're running 6 days a week in training camp and 2 days. Anytime you have these massive swings in volume and intensity, the body doesn't particularly like it. So if we look at the typical way people deload, they go from training 4 or 5 days a week and 2 or 3 days high intensity, whatever, and then all of a sudden they cut out 50% of that intensity or 50% of that load for a week, and then boom, they introduce it right back the next week. It just provides this huge swing where you see the immune system change, you see the hormonal system change, you see way too much variation in the load, and you end up basically just causing more problems than you're solving often. So I think people just have a tendency naturally to cut their intensities and their volumes back so far that it just is a shock to the body, and then you reintroduce it 1 week later. And again, you're just setting yourself up more for problems than anything else. I think the key is really just managing that process. You don't need this massive reduction in intensity or volume in order to recover. You should be recovering as you go. And then, yes, as you get closer to events, you do start to change the volume a bit, but you do have to keep, a handle on the overall intensity and the overall stress. So, when we train, Demetrius Johnson and different fighters over the years, a lot of times we get to fight week and we'd see other camps, maybe spending 40 minutes a day training or 30 minutes a day. And again, they went from training 3 hours a day, 2 hours a day, 5-6 days a week in a training camp. And then the week before the fight, they're going to cut their train back to, maybe a tenth of that or 20% of that. Well, it's just a recipe for problems, because again, there's such a massive drop right before the competition, and the body is just not responding well to that. It needs to keep a lot of that stimulus in there. So again, I'm not saying that you don't change intensities or you don't manage volumes as you get up to a competition, but I think the way that people do it now is just way too big of a shock to the body. It needs to be more gradual leading up to competition, and you need to keep more of it in there the week of the competition. I think a lot of people do these days.
Yeah, that's good for me. I'm gonna change some stuff. My event is March 1st, so and I still had a good number in there, and because I've done this before, and I think I remember not like that last week. Kind of, I didn't feel good going in, and it didn't feel right. So with this year, I had the taper as like, I've heard like runners talking about don't increase your volume more than 10% per week. Probably like a good reverse way to do it with the taper is just taper it down. Like let's say 10%. Let's just use that number, just because it's a slower, gradual decrease.
Yeah, absolutely. I think over the last 2 or 3 weeks of competition, you're going to be gradually tapering off some of that volume. And again, the goal of the whole thing is to reduce any residual fatigue so that you can perform at the highest level you're capable of, and you're not hampered by that that fatigue that's accumulated. But again, if you've managed your recovery properly, then you really should not accumulate so much fatigue that it takes this huge drop in volume to allow your body to recover and regenerate itself. And the other thing, like you said, is a lot of times you just, especially if you've been training a lot of volume, you just don't feel good when you take 2 or 3 days off, or you just cut this volume back massively. Your body, again, everything just kind of drops. Your overall preparedness drops, your hormones drop, your immune systems drop. Everything basically just kind of decreases, and you're not able to prepare. You're not able to perform as well as you were probably in training. So again, I think it has to just be much more of a gradual process. You have to manage your overall recovery as you're progressing through camp, and not get to the point where you're just completely destroyed and you feel like you have to take a week off to even recover from that. If you can just take a more progressive approach, again, you can train quite a bit the week of the actual competition. And like I said, when we look at fighters, we'll do 2 sessions a day usually for the 4 days leading up to a fight, and we'll train in the mornings leading up to a fight. So I just think people, again, they spend a lot of the time in their training kind of slightly overtrained, and then they feel like they have to take a break at the end to try to recover from that. But if you can manage that process better, and you can not be overtrained for most of your camp, then you can keep that volume in there. You're going to perform a whole lot better at the end.
Absolutely, and that's a great segue into Morpheus, because I used Bioforce for my my second Strong First certification, and it really helped me to be able to say, okay, I'm getting closer, but my numbers are good. My daily, my weekly, everything was great, and I felt like, cool, I got affirmation from Bioforce. Now I'm using Morpheus, so I know like the Morpheus is going to say like, hey, back it off today, whatever day it is, whether it's 3 weeks out or 2 weeks out or 1 week out. So I feel really comfortable using the Morpheus heading into this event. And with an athlete, I would feel really comfortable as well, like knowing what volume, what intensity I can, keep up with that if I was using it. So let's talk about the Morpheus. I'll just give a quick overview for everybody. I wear my watch in the morning to check my HRV, and it takes 2.5 minutes. And right after I do it, it asks me, how many hours I slept, because I don't have a sleep monitor that the Morpheus actually connects with some of the other sleep monitors, which is pretty cool. I don't have one, so I put it in, how many hours I slept, what my quality of sleep is, if I'm sore, and how I feel. And then it'll update my zones. And then I can do my workout, and it'll update my zones. And I like that I can pick conditioning, I can pick weight training, or I can pick the combination. So which I think is very cool. It's either strength, conditioning, or mixed. And then before I go to bed, it asks me what my fatigue level is, what my nutrition was like that day, and that's just a scale of 1 to 5. And then if I had any drinks. So Joel, I just wanted to give that piece of it. Like, talk to us about what we're doing with the Morpheus.
Yeah, well, there's 2 things. So like you mentioned, my first HRV product was Bioforce HRV, which is out in 2011. And really what it did is it gave you your HRV number, your actual score there, and then it would give you essentially like a high, medium, low for recovery, in amber, green, or red. But as you use HRV, as the average person uses it, the first kind of question they figure out is, well, what's driving this? What's actually causing these changes in HRV? Is it my training? Is it my sleep? And a lot of times people would say, well, I'm not working out that hard. Why is my HRV low? Or why am I in the red? I didn't work out yesterday. And so people would not really understand how all these different facets of their life were impacting their HRV, impacting their recovery. And then secondly, they didn't always have a very clear idea of, okay, well, now what should I do in the gym as a result of what my HRV or what my recovery says? So I built Morpheus really to help people put more of those pieces together. So to be able to tie their sleep to their HRV, to be able to tie their workouts, not just today, but yesterday, the day before, by looking at their different training zones, to look at their activity, how many steps they took in a day. All these things play a huge role in recovery because they're all related essentially to energy. And at the end of the day, your body only has so much energy it can use. And if you spend all your day training and moving around and mentally stressed, your recovery is going to suffer. And so Morpheus was really a way for me to help people put all those different pieces together. And then secondly, I want to give people more specific guidance of, what do HRV numbers mean and how do I translate them into an actual training zone? So that's where the 3 heart rate zone concept of Morpheus was born, that the blue zone for recovery. And I think you didn't quite talk about, but one thing that Morpheus does is after your workout, it'll look at your heart rate zones. It'll help you adjust and basically tell you how impactful that workout was on your recovery. So if I spend time in my blue zone, I'm going to see my recovery score slightly increase. If I spend most of the time in the green zone, which is my conditioning zone, or my red, which is my overload or max intensity, then I'm going to see my score decrease. So it also gives you a way to kind of understand the overall impact of that workout as well. So what we're working on now is giving people specific training plans. It'll essentially give you my heart rate training methods and my conditioning methods and say, hey, go spend 15 minutes in your Morpheus green zone doing this type of method, and then go spend 20 minutes in your blue zone doing this type of method. And I can give people more specific guidelines and specific training programs using those heart rate methods. So really the biggest thing with Morpheus was pulling all those pieces into one single app. And as you mentioned, it pulls in your sleep data. If you're using, a Fitbit or an Apple Watch or an Oura Ring or lots of different sleep trackers out there, it'll pull in your activity from really the same types of devices and just help people make more sense of that. And then really the long-term vision is, for all the coaches who are listening to this, I really wanted Morpheus to be a coaching platform as much as anything else, because as a coach over the years who's used data for a long time, the biggest thing I always realized was so much of the results that people were seeing weren't really from just my workout. They were from all these other factors that influenced how well they're going to recover, how well they're going to respond. So if I did a great workout for somebody, but then they went home and they slept 3 hours because they were up late working or they were playing video games or whatever they might be doing, the results they were going to see were going to suffer. And I had no way of seeing that unless I had a way to measure it and to look at it. And these days, people have so many different wearables and so many different tools out there and they're measuring things, but the average coach or trainer has no way of seeing that data. It's just lost, right? The user is not going to show every screen or share all their wearable data with their trainer and coach every time they come in for the most part. So what we're working on now is it's called the grid. And really it's a way for a coach or trainer, therapist, gym owner, anybody really to see all this different data from all the people that they're working with and to be able to have a much better sense of transparency between what are the people that you're training doing outside the gym. If they're sleeping 4 hours a night, you need to adjust your workouts accordingly. If they're not eating very well, or if they're, like I said, they're in a massive deadline from work or it's finals week, all of those things have such a huge impact on the results and what they should be doing in the gym that if you don't have any window into that, a lot of what you're doing is just guessing and kind of hoping for the best. So the Morpheus Grid platform we're working on now is going to give you access to all this data. So even if the clients you're training don't use Morpheus, so they just have a Fitbit, you still can see their sleep data, you can still see their activity data, you can still see their heart rate data. And then we're building some communication platforms in there, or communication tools in there, so it'll notify you the most important things. So it'll show you the clients who didn't sleep very well last night, the clients who maybe spent the last 4 days doing high intensity workouts and need a break. They're going to send you some just kind of really simple ways to scan that data and make it useful. And then we'll have messaging and communication tools in there, so you can say, hey, what's going on here? And you can send pictures back and forth, and you can communicate with the people you're working with. So again, the biggest thing I've always wanted to do is just give coaches better technology and better tools to help people make better decisions outside the gym and to keep them more accountable outside the gym. So really Morpheus is, of course, it's for the average person who just wants to get in better shape and train for an event like you're doing. But really the long-term goal I have and the vision I have is to help coaches really use technology for the first time in a more effective manner to, again, just help people drive better lifestyle decisions and make better decisions in the gym as well to deliver longer term, more sustainable, healthy results, whether that's, again, health and wellness based people or just want to look and feel their best, or it's athletes need to perform their best and need to be ready to go on game day. So all this data, to me right now, is just being lost. It's being wasted for the most part because people are collecting it, but the coaches and trainers can't see it. They don't have a way to take action on it. They don't have a way to hold the people accountable. They don't have a way to communicate back and forth. It's just out there, but it's not being used the way that it should be. And really, that's kind of the big picture of Morpheus and the problem I'm trying to solve with it.
Yeah, I love it. I love it because I think in the past it was always like the barrier, and whether it was a barrier or not, was people saying, well, my people aren't going to give me that information, or they're going to forget to do stuff. Or now with all these wearables, yeah, it's making it so much easier. Joel, I got a question though on the questions that,
Sure.
they're subjective. Obviously, sleep isn't, but like quality of sleep, soreness.
Sure.
Sometimes I don't know yet because I just took it in the morning. I didn't get out of bed yet. I don't know how sore I am, and I gauge it. I can tell. And how do you feel? Which is always, again, that's subjective.
Sure.
How much
Yep.
is that going into? How much does that weigh into, like, with the HRV? Is it just like a little piece of it, or is it a lot of it? How do you do that?
Yeah, so right now it's not a huge amount. It's a few percentage points here and there. So really what we're only doing is using the fringes, right? So if your recovery, if your HRV looks great, but you say you feel a 1, which is really bad, you say you're extremely sore, or all these sorts of things, then we'll adjust it down a bit, or vice versa. If maybe your recovery score looks lower, but you say you feel amazing, then we'll adjust it up a little bit. So we're really only making adjustments if you're on the far ends of any of those questions. If you're kind of in the middle, you're so-so, that it doesn't really make any adjustments. Really, what the primary driver, again, is it's HRV, but it's also, again, it does look at hours of sleep. It does look at your heart rate zones and your heart rates the last couple of days. It looks at all those sorts of things. But really what I wanted to do is we're now collecting so much data, we can start to correlate a lot of these things. We can answer questions, like how well does how you feel actually correlate to HRV? How well does your sleep and how you rate your sleep quality correlate to HRV? A lot of this stuff was just collecting the data to see what we could pull out of it, to understand, how well do people have a good sense of their recovery level subjectively? I mean, you're right, they are subjective, but how good are we at subjectively estimating how we feel, and how does that feeling then correlate to our HRV and other recovery levels? So the more data we collect, the smarter Morpheus can get, the more we can then make better recommendations, the more we can fine tune our algorithm to make it more accurate, and the more things that we can essentially do with Morpheus. So a lot of it, again, it was subjective and it is subjective, but there's something to be said for that too. If you feel terrible, then even if your HRV might look good or look average or look okay, you feel terrible, you feel terrible. There's something to be said for that's having an impact on your recovery because you don't feel good. So we want to just, again, start out with collecting data and see what we can see out of it and use that to refine and hone the algorithm over time. But, like I said, the short answer is it's making smaller adjustments to it right now. And if we see reasons to change that, we will. But mostly, like I said, it's just adjusting it. Yeah. If you're on the far ends of that, then we will adjust it down. If you're, a 1 or a 5, or on the outsides, if you're kind of in the middle, then it's not really going to do much of any adjusting.
Cool. What if I don't measure? Like this morning, we had some stuff in the morning, and I didn't measure. And so if I work out, it won't give me zones. It'll say, do you still want to go on? Let's say I don't measure. Does it take that data into account, like that? Okay, here, wow, he did a 30-minute workout and heart rate was up and down, did some intervals. Is it still going to use that data?
Yeah, absolutely. It still uses everything it's got. It's just not prescribing the zones for you that day, so you won't see the change in recovery score after the workout, because we're not giving you the recovery score without that. But it's still using everything you're pulling in. It's still using, and we're still using our database. And kind of something we're toying around with the idea of. We'll do some testing to see what we want to do with it. But there's just a certain percentage of people who they're just not going to measure HRV every day, but we have all this other data. So we might start looking at, instead of giving you a recovery percentage, let's say we might give you a recovery high, medium, or low. Even if we don't have your HRV, if we have enough sleep data, we have enough workout data, we have enough activity data, if we have enough other data out there, we can estimate your recovery, not quite as accurately as if we have HRV, obviously, but we can still estimate it to some extent. So we might start maybe having a free Morpheus version that's a light version that would take in other data outside of HRV and still give you some sort of a barometer of recovery, even if it's not quite as specific as a number, but just making it as accessible for people to use as possible. Because again, if we're looking at a coach or trainer here, he might have 100 clients or 20 clients or whatever, but some of them might just not measure HRV, and there might be reasons for it. So we'll still try to make sure that we give value back, and we're still giving all the useful information to the coach or trainer to use. So that's, again, part of why we're collecting all this other subjective data, is to see how well those things correlate to HRV. Because if we can use all that data, and all that data, does a good job of predicting HRV anyway, then we can use that pretty effectively to give people, a rough gauge of recovery, if it's not quite as accurate.
Very cool. What about, Joel? Like I said to you right now, my dog, we haven't been doing as much because she's going through some heartworm treatment. So I can't walk her the 2 to 3 miles. She can't get her heart rate up. So one of my things is like, all right, I live on the 25th floor. I take the stairs every day. And should I be monitoring that as well? Like, obviously it's going to help take into account what I'm doing, because I do a lot of these things. What about like when I am walking the dog 2 to 3 miles, should I put the heart rate monitor on and try to track? I mean, because it's not a big deal for me. I don't dress up in a suit and go to work every day. I can put the heart rate monitor on, no problem, in the morning, and go for my walk, with my 3 to 4 mile walk with my dog every time I go up the stairs. Boom. Is that too much information? Do I need that? Talk to me about where do we draw the line?
So I would pull that into the general category of just activity. So I don't know if you have any sort of activity tracker or not, but Morpheus does pull in just general steps and activities from, again, Fitbits or Apple Watches, or, really most of Garmin, pulling any of those sorts of,
even the iPhone. It takes my health from the health app. Yeah.
Yeah. So I would say anything like that really just falls in the category of overall activity, which we do use for looking at recovery and looking at HRV and everything else. So if you're just walking the dog around, I mean, that's just your average recovery, kind of walking around. So I would say you don't need to record that separately. That's just in the category of recovery. I would say if you're doing anything where your heart rate's over 100 beats per minute for, more than 20 or 30 minutes, then it's time to probably throw the monitor on and track that, because that's a little bit more significant. But just kind of walking around your average thing for 5 or 10 minutes upstairs, I wouldn't track that any differently. I would just consider that under the guise of the overall activity that you're tracking. And again, whether you're using your phone or you're using a Fitbit or whatever, Morpheus pulls that whole thing in under just the category of activity, which is important as well.
Okay, cool. So so then the answer is yes for me with my dog a lot of the times, only because I take her to an area where we are doing like a 15 to 16 minute mile. I have 30, 35 pounds on my back, and my heart rate, and there's some hills there. And we'll push it. And so I will get it in the low 100s. My heart rate pretty much the whole time for that, 45 to 55 minutes, 3 to 4 mile walk that we do. And 4 mile would be more, but yeah. So on those days I can do it. On a regular walk, no. Excellent. Joel, what about are you guys thinking of maybe adding like a sleep tracker, like almost so I could say, cool, I got my Morpheus, I don't want to get a Fitbit, almost like an all-in-one?
Yeah, no, we've definitely looked that direction. We're continuing to kind of look at our next generation device right now. And so, that's one of the questions we're trying to answer, right? Is there's so many people out there that already have devices, and there's so many people out there that are using the devices, the Oura Rings and the Garmins and the Fitbits. So do I want to give them another device that does the exact same thing, or do we want to just kind of rely on devices they already have? I mean, there's no easy answer, and we're trying to work with our existing customers and potential coaches to kind of figure out what the right answer for that is. So yeah, I think in an ideal world, one device to rule them all is great. The challenge is really just if you make something that's really comfortable to wear for sleep, its chances are less likely to be as accurate for HRV. Or if you wear something that's really accurate for HRV, it's probably a little more clunky if you're going to have a bunch of memory in there to record your workouts. And it's really, really hard to make one device that does everything well. You kind of just making one device that does everything kind of poorly. So it's more of a question just figuring out what's the most important thing for us, to do, and what do the people need the most that's missing. So we'll continue to evolve the Morpheus product, and like I said, we're looking at the next version now and kind of figuring out what that needs to look like. And sleep is definitely an area that we're exploring and may want to pull in.
Very cool. I guess because I only use it for the morning track. I only wear the device for my HRV in the morning. So I put
Yep.
my heart rate monitor on. I just use my app for any of the workouts. I guess that's why I felt like, oh, yeah, cool. It could be for sleep. Joel,
Yeah, I mean, let me mention one thing real quick here. In an ideal world, you would be able to measure HRV overnight. And there are companies out there that are showing you HRV scores from overnight. And I'm here to tell you, unfortunately, that at this point in time, that's not accurate. It is simply not possible to get accurate HRV data overnight for a number of reasons. The first being, anytime you change positions from laying on my stomach versus my back versus my side, my HRV numbers are very different, but the device can't tell what position you're in. The second thing is the device can slide around. And if the device moves at all over the course of the night, it's going to be in a different position. It's going to read slightly differently. And then the third thing is when you're sleeping, for the most part, anyone who's in a reasonably good level of shape is going to have their HRV. It's almost maxed out is kind of the way to look at it. Your HRV can only, your parasympathetic nervous system only has so much it can turn on. And somebody who's reasonably well conditioned, they're going to have it maximally turned on all night long. So looking at that overnight doesn't really do you any good. You're just kind of seeing what it shows because it's already always on. So, in an ideal world, yeah, you'd measure HRV overnight. It'd be accurate. You wouldn't have to measure in the morning. All would be well. Unfortunately, it just doesn't work that way. The technology doesn't support it. There's literally next to no research out there that supports it and shows it done well in a practical setting. I actually just wrote the chapter or section and chapter on HRV and heart rate training for the NSCA's new textbook, Essential to Sports Science, and I reviewed all the literature and dug into everything to see what was out there, and really there isn't. So again, I know companies out there are selling HRV overnight and they're saying it's accurate. That look, the reality is, unfortunately, it's just not. It's not accurate HRV data. There's nothing to support that. It makes it easier, obviously, but at the end of the day, easy doesn't really matter if you're getting inaccurate data. So maybe down the road in the next few years, they'll find ways to solve that problem. But even then, like I said, your HRV is essentially kind of maxed out overnight for most athletes and most people in reasonably good shape. So it doesn't show you anything to see that it's just maxed out overnight all the time.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Joel, let's finish up. I've heard a lot of great things about your conditioning certification. I signed up today because, you sign up you tell everybody you can sign up twice a year only. And so the next certification is in June. So if you sign up now, you'll go to 8 weeks out, click on conditioning, the certification, and you can learn more about the certification, and you can sign up to get $200 off of it. So Joel, give us the 1-minute pitch on the Bioforce conditioning certification.
Yeah, look, the certification is really everything I've learned over the last almost 20 years now. Applying the conditioning methods with different people, from high-level combat athletes to people, in the military, to average people that literally just want to look and feel their best. So it's really, I think, it's the best course out there. If you say, hey, I'm a conditioning or I'm a coach, I understand the strength training side, I know how to get people stronger, or I know how to get people faster, but I just really kind of don't understand how to put all the pieces of conditioning together. I don't really know how to incorporate conditioning in an effective scientific way. I don't quite know how to help people with that end of things. And so I took everything, like I said, from movement to the mental performance. I got guys like Brian Kane for the mental side. I got Chris Duffin for movement and soft tissue work and all of his side of things. We have nutrition in there with Dr. Mike Roussel. We have Mike Robertson, Bill Hartman. I really tried to bring together, all the best of the guys out there that I work with and I've seen be extremely effective in their side of things, and pull into one course. And again, really, it's for coaches who say, hey, I really get the strength training side of things, but the conditioning, the energy system development, that's where I don't quite know how to put all the pieces together. And I really wanted to build a course that gave them every single piece they needed to know and every single component of how to write a conditioning program, how to help people improve their conditioning. And again, it's not just for coaches that say, hey, I train high-level athletes. It's for any coach that trains anybody, because conditioning really is an important part of health and wellness and longevity and everything else. So, again, it's about 18 hours of material. We've got 3,000 plus certified coaches now. Every year I have a free live event in Seattle for all our certified coaches. And so we get coaches flying in from Germany and Australia and New Zealand and Japan, and that's included free with the course. So, again, I'd highly encourage anyone out there that's listening that feels like their conditioning is just not quite what they're best at. They don't quite get how to put the piece together and write conditioning programs. The certification is going to help you tremendously be a more effective coach and deliver better results for whoever you're working with.
Very cool. I'll remind everybody, you can go to 8 weeks out, don't spell 8 out. It's the number 8 weeks out. And I'll have a link to that on my site in the show notes. And you can sign up to kind of get the insiders on the insiders list for the certification. So Joel, thanks so much for taking so much time. I just kind of kept going, and this has been a long interview. So I appreciate you taking time to talk about conditioning and heart rate variability and the Morpheus.
Yeah, no problem. Again, thanks for having me. Let me know how your race goes. You got to go out there and smash it and come back and tell us how you did.
I know, absolutely. I'm looking forward to it. So thanks again, Joel.
Yeah, no problem.
All right, that's going to do it for episode 274 of the Strength Coach Podcast. Remember, strengthcoach.com, 3 days, just $1. You'll have access to all the articles, videos, and programs. It's the only place to have full access to Coach Boyle. He's on the forum every day answering questions. To access that offer, go to strengthcoach.com. Click the Join Now button to get started on your trial. Special thanks to Chris Parrier and the folks over at Perform Better. Remember, right now, free online shipping, no minimum order. PerformBetter.com for all their products and info on their educational seminars. Thanks to Coach Boyle and Joel Jamison for sharing their insights and philosophies into the world of strength conditioning and performance enhancement. Thanks to Adam Doughty, Tim Robinson, and Train Heroic. Head over to trainheroic.com to start your free 14-day trial. Let them know I sent you. You'll save 10% off your first year of the Train Heroic Pro or Elite Edition. Rachel Cosgrove for the Results Fitness University Business of Fitness segment. Check them out at resultsfitnessuniversity.com. Eric Dagati and Functional Movement Systems. Check them out at functionalmovement.com. My name's Anthony Renna. My new book, Be Like the Best, consists of 50 interviews with top fitness pros, and after each interview is a Be Like, which is just an action step or a challenge that'll help you be like the best. Go to Amazon.com or ContinueFit.com or BeLikeTheBest.com. You can check them all out there. That's going to do it. Thanks for listening, and I'll speak to you next time.